find a way.
So I consider myself a decent pickleball player, but if someone ever wants to really understand how much better a professional is than me, they can watch my wife, watch us play.
Oh my God.
So you're playing around with me and my friend Sam. Holly goes to the bar, gets a drink, starts watching. You murder us. Like, murder us any way you want to murder us. And my wife is literally about to fall out of her chair laughing at me. So that told me everything I need to know about the difference between a decent pickleball player and a professional.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued. I'm always intrigued by how people get to the top of their field in anything. So if we go back to a young Rob Nunnery when you're a kid, tell me about that kid.
Yeah. So always very competitive.
Yeah.
Always wanted to win. Middle child, had an older sister, younger sister. And I mean, classic growing up in a neighborhood, middle class neighborhood, making up games. I remember we used to have, like, in our driveway, it was just a line, and we would play tennis over that line. Just, that was the net.
Making up games.
So making up games, but I always wanted to win them. Always loved to be outside. Just played every sport under the sun other than soccer, sadly. I know.
It's too bad.
I know. My younger sister went the soccer route and played in college, but I played baseball, basketball, football. I was probably, like, the one I actually enjoyed the most was football, probably. I was quarterback, growing up into middle school. I was going to be quarterback in high school, had that path. I just, like, in my eyes, I was just never going to be quite tall enough or big enough to do that and play in college or whatever it may be. And I had started playing tennis relatively late. I started, I think, at 12 years old, which, for highly competitive tennis is very late. Most of these kids start 5, 6, and, with the goals of going pro, and they usually go Division I college or make a run at pro. So I knew starting late, I'm playing against all these kids that have been playing for 7 years already. I was like, okay, I gotta learn this fast. And I remember the first tournaments I played, I went 6 tournaments in a row without winning a match. So I think that's 12 matches lost in a row. And I was just so down, but it was the best way to get into it, in my opinion, because as a competitive person, it forces you to figure out, like, okay, what do I have to do better to start winning some of these matches? And then it drove me to practice more, to, like, really figure it out. So always had that competitive nature and, like, this drive to problem solve when things weren't going well.
Man, I played all kinds of sports too. And like, every sport brought out a different person. They all have a different culture. Yeah. And like, when I was young, I look back and I think I was kind of a different person depending on the season. Yeah. Like, baseball season, I was different from soccer season. Yeah. Football was my favorite sport too. Yeah. Football is a whole different culture. Yeah. Can bring out, looking back, it probably brought out the worst of me.
Fair.
I mean, there's nothing like a football locker room or a baseball dugout to teach you teach a boy the lessons of life, right?
It's absolutely true.
A lot of downtime. But tennis is like the opposite end of the spectrum. Yeah. When you look back, you were a football quarterback. You pick up a tennis racket, and jump into a sport that is very technical, with kids that have played. They've probably taken lessons since they were 5, right? And you become competitive in that. What do you think you brought from other sports in your personality to be able to catch up at the age of 12?
Yeah, I think it was really the first time where I felt like I had full control over my results. So I felt like in other sports, it was always kind of dependent on, where the coach was going to put me. Where was he going to bat me in the lineup? Where, what position was I going to play? How much playing time was I going to get? Are they going to let other kids play? A lot was out of my control. Yeah. And it felt like with tennis, for the first time, I was in complete control over the results, everything, for good or bad. Like, if I lost, it was totally on me, and I had a very clear plan of how to get better, because I could analyze it, and then I could, practice it, and then go compete again and implement it. So it just felt like there's a lot more under my control versus being in a team.
Yeah, I see that. I've always gravitated toward team sports my whole life. I've coached team sports, played team sports, and seeing my kids play tennis and me myself playing tennis, it's so different than a team sport because you are out there alone. When you lose your confidence, there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
Team sport, you can hide a little bit, get your confidence back. Yeah. Not tennis, man. Yeah. Like you are out there alone and you've got to turn the momentum around and figure that out. And watching my kids work through that is so cool to see. Like just different than any team sport.
Yeah.
But I also think that team sports bring a certain bite to a person.
Yeah.
Like especially football, like it's a contact sport. Like there's this element of like, you just got to stick your chest out.
Yep. And it's the dynamic of having other people around and their personalities and feeling like, you've got to stack up in that pecking order somehow. And like, where's your place? Like it's just like the classic human tribe thing.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
There's a piece of that.
It's almost like you're putting together a puzzle, and the puzzle pieces are different for a individual sport like tennis versus a team sport because you're having to account for different personalities and all those dynamics. But man, I think there's so much value in a kid playing both of those things. I look at soccer players and think, man, they would so learn to deal with their own lack of their own fear of failure and all these little adversity if they had played tennis growing up along with the team sport.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. I think about with tennis, like I don't play much tennis now, but I think back to growing up in college and when I was playing it really competitively. And I remember how much of like a mental toll it took on me out there. I would go through, playing in the heat of the summer, 3-set match, 7-5 in the third, and I would win. And it would just, afterwards, I wasn't even like happy. I was just happy I didn't lose. I wasn't happy I won, right? It was to me, it was so mentally grueling and taxing, physically as well. But I would say more mentally, that even afterwards, I was just like, one, I'm glad it's over. And two, I'm glad I didn't lose because that doesn't feel good. But winning doesn't feel great either.
Yeah.
It was strange.
But in all the other sports we've played, I can't say that about any other sport. I've never felt like I was just mentally taxed from soccer or football or whatever, physical. But yeah, it is unique. That is unique to tennis.
Yeah, you're on your own and you have to, you don't really have any coaching. You're got to problem solve on your own and you got an opponent that's trying to do the same. Yeah. And it's truly a chess match in terms of strategy and what you're doing and trying to figure out what's going to work. And I just remember that being and also just having to be locked in and really focused
on every point.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the nature of the game. Like with soccer, you kind of pace yourself through the game. You don't go in 100 miles an hour in every play. You just physically can't do that. But in tennis, it's short bursts. It's almost like football. You do have to go all out on every point.
And I think it's really interesting with tennis because you've got the hold break aspect of it. So even in that first game, if I'm serving and I know I'm playing a good server, there's a lot of pressure on game one for me to hold serve. So even if I get to, if I'm at deuce in the first game of serving, like I'm already mentally like, okay, I cannot, the pressure's on because I know it's going to be very hard to break this person. So I think that's a little unique as well in terms of there being really interesting tension and importance very, very early on in the competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you started late in that sport and you caught up because that's ultimately the sport you played in college, right?
Yeah.
And so how long did it take you to catch up with the kids that had been playing?
I would say I wasn't really good being like looking at like D1 schools. I wasn't good until probably 16.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was a late developer. So physically hadn't really matured until I would say like I started really physically maturing in college, freshman, sophomore year. And that's a really big deal for these sports, for teenagers. It's those kids that develop when they're 16 and look like a grown man. I mean, it's such a leg up. It's such an advantage going into, getting scholarships and stuff like that and just being better. So I was a late developer. At 16, I started getting good rankings. We looked at Georgia ranking, then Southern section ranking, and then you look at national.
Yeah.
And I had gotten to about top 100 in the country, 16, 17, and into the 18s. And yeah, that's when I was just like, okay, well, I can actually do this in college now, which was always my goal. I never had aspirations of going pro like most kids. I was just like, if I can get a scholarship and have school paid for and do that with tennis, to me, that's a win. And yeah.
Wow. And you're doing this in Atlanta. So this is a really, like, Atlanta is a super hotbed sport for tennis, obviously. So you're probably running the gauntlet at 12 and 13, getting beaten up.
Oh yeah. I was, the first 6 tournaments, at the end of it, I was like, man, do I want to keep doing this, or do I want to go back to playing baseball? Because that was a sport that I had just stopped playing. And yeah, I just stuck with it. And as anything, you keep doing it, even if you're losing. Actually, when you're losing is where you make the most gains and the most learnings. It eventually turns.
Yeah. Yeah. You go on, choose to play tennis in college. You go to UNC Asheville, right? And you play there for 4 years.
I actually went to Samford and Birmingham my first year.
Okay.
And I had wanted to go to Asheville out of high school. They just didn't have scholarship open.
Okay.
So it was always kind of the plan was to go to Asheville, but did a detour for a year at Samford and Birmingham, had a great experience there. But then after freshman year, transferred to Asheville and was there for the other 3 years.
Good experience?
Great experience. I mean, Asheville, I grew up going to the mountains of Tennessee, not so far from here as a kid. Like every Thanksgiving, we'd go visit my mom's side of the family. So I always had special memories growing up of coming up, through Greenville, up through Asheville, like that. I just love kind of Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee. And I just remember visiting in high school and I was just like, this place is awesome. Like I love the mountains. This is where I want to be. Yeah. And it took a year to get there, but yeah, had an absolute blast. I would say the tennis wasn't incredibly competitive. Our first year, we were good. Coach left. I went through 4 coaches in 4 years, so that makes a tough college experience. So Samford had obviously a different coach, and then Asheville, sophomore year, he left and went to Drake University. Then I had a coach. Junior year, he left, and the Liberty coach came and was our coach in the 4th year. So obviously very disjointed. Yeah. Made recruiting tough because, everybody that's recruiting a kid, he leaves and then the kid follows or whatever happens. But so the team wasn't very good junior, senior years, but again, it was good teammates and a lot of fun and just not highly competitive.
Yeah. Division I tennis is so international too. It's really rare to see an American player playing Division I tennis. Is that how it was when you were coming through?
Yeah, I think I was the only American on the team. I think, maybe every year at Asheville. Had all New Zealand guys my first year there, then had Brazil, had Canada, Australia, French. So just the whole gamut. It is super rare to have Americans.
Yeah, soccer's similar. When I went to school, it was pretty diverse. And coming from East Tennessee, it's one of the biggest advantages I think of playing college sports. Is just that circle of friends change. It's a lot different.
It is, yeah. You get to meet a lot of new people.
Yeah. So you're in school and you start getting. When I was 18, I went to school and I had no interest in anything academic. It was just a means to playing more sports. But then that changes over the course of the 4 years. You become more of a human being, which 18-year-old boys do.
Yeah.
And so what did you discover about yourself in college?
Looking back, it's silly because I really didn't have any kind of plan of like, okay, what am I going to do after college? Or like, what am I going to study and do? I studied broadcast journalism, but not for the reason being is I talked to some people that sounded like the easiest path to getting a diploma. Yep. So that's the route.
The least distraction from playing your sport.
Exactly.
Yep.
And there were like 4-hour blocks of a class that had a bunch of credits where it's studio time. So what does that mean, right? So I was just like, okay, this is the path I'm gonna take. And the other reason was the only math class that I had to take, and science, was statistics and meteorology. That's it. So nothing hard, and I could scoot through and get a degree without having to do math or science. So that was the path.
Yeah.
But in terms of what did I discover about myself? Well, yeah, one, didn't care about math and science, just wanted the degree and wanted to play tennis. But then, senior year comes and you're like, oh, I've got tennis is done for the most part, right? What am I going to do? And my path was either follow the broadcast journalism or follow something with tennis, whether it's coaching. I never wanted a traditional life in terms of, and I knew this I remember very distinctly having a conversation with a friend in my driveway in high school, and we were just having a talk, and it was just like, we're so programmed to graduate, and especially in Georgia in the South, it's you get a girlfriend in college, you get married right after, you have kids, you get a job, and that's the life. And I just knew I never wanted that. I wanted to travel. I've always been pretty free-spirited. I wanted to see different parts of the world. That's always been like a really core component of who I am. And I remember that from an early age. So when I had the opportunity of follow broadcast journalism or tennis, I did the whole put together a reel, was going to look at sports reporting at like local markets, and had an offer from a place in Butte, Montana. And, but on the side, I was like, you know what? Like, what else is out there? And I remember, I don't even know how I found it. I was just Googling, but two families, one in England, I think. I don't remember the exact town, but all I do remember is looking it up, and they do cheese races that go down a hill and they're chasing big rolling blocks of cheese. That's all I remember from it. So you guys listening, you might know where that is, but the other one was in the Scottish Highlands, and it was with this family, the McGeochs. And I ended up going there out of, like, right when I graduated, I just flew to Scotland and lived with this family, and was this kid, Callum. I was his private coach, and traveled around with them to tournaments and even played some myself. And yeah, that's like, I wouldn't have changed that for anything. That was such a fun experience. And it kind of kicked off my, my travels and tennis and a bunch of stuff.
And you knew that early on that's the kind of the non-traditional direction. I think growing up in the South, like, I think for females, these certain life expectations are imposed upon them a lot. But for boys, it's no different. Like, and so you look at, you go to Scotland. Is it rural? Is it urban?
It's incredibly rural. It was in a town called Boat-of-Garten. Boat of Garten. And it was in truly like the Highlands. It was north of a town called Aviemore. Gorgeous, but very rural.
Yeah.
And not a lot of sun.
I'm picturing people walking around herding sheep, and that's pretty accurate.
Very green, beautiful. It's in the mountains called the Cairngorms.
Yeah.
Very, very pretty.
Yeah. Is that your first time outside the US?
So that was second, or technically went to Mexico as a kid, Cancun. I don't even think we needed a passport at that time, so that doesn't count.
Yeah, right.
But no, first time was actually a really random opportunity to go to China. So China was my first time out of the country when I was 20 years old. It was the summer after my sophomore year at Asheville. I grew up going to a tennis academy called Peter Burwash International. They have a bunch of locations throughout the world. They basically train their pros in-house, and then they partner with different resorts and clubs throughout the world, and they place their pros there based on a certain standard of coaching and professionalism and all of that. And so I had a kind of an N, and I had a friend that was at the place in Beijing at the resort there, and his dad was sick, and we had kept in touch. And he's like, hey, I have to come home. Is there any way we could try to figure out how to get you here to cover for me for at least the summer? And I was like, sure.
Yeah.
And then connected with like the owners of it, and literally 2 weeks notice, they got me a visa, and I was off to Beijing when I was 20 years old. First time out of the country.
It's such a gift to be able to travel in your 20s, because it's this time in your life where you're really trying to figure yourself out. Like, you know so little about yourself.
Yeah.
And you learn so much in your 20s. And I've always thought the benefit of traveling and living in other places is the self-awareness that it creates. Like, it shines a light on things that you take for granted about yourself.
Yeah. And I think a key piece of that for me was doing it by myself.
Yeah.
I think if I had, call it another person, a friend, that it wouldn't have forced me to get out of my comfort zone as much. And and when I do travel with a partner or a friend, it's very easy to kind of, insulate yourself from the actual surroundings, whether it's the language barrier, whether it's interacting with people and trying to figure stuff out. Being there solo, and this was before they had the Summer Olympics there in 2008, I believe. I was there in 2005. And so English was not a thing. Nobody spoke English. Nobody. So it was truly like, I have to figure out how to communicate, how to get around, how to get a taxi, and it was just, the absolute best experience in terms of getting me out of my comfort zone. And it, I would say, like, looking back at my first 21 years of life, that was easily the most impactful in terms of me growing and figuring out who I am as a person and like what I want.
Really accelerates the learning curve.
Agreed.
Yeah. And it just builds so much confidence too, especially doing it by yourself. Like, you figure that stuff out. That's before there were apps for Uber apps, right? Like, you really did have to figure out a taxi.
Yeah. No translation apps or anything.
But to do that builds such confidence.
I remember, so just growing up, I wasn't really encouraged to, well, no fault to my parents, but I wasn't really encouraged to have a voice or communicate well. And going to China really forced me to find that. I had to go talk to strangers. I had to do a bunch of stuff that I wasn't comfortable with growing up throughout childhood. So it really forced me to explore that and get out of my comfort zone. It was the biggest, looking back, it was like, man, it's a time I was like really proud of myself of just like being forced just to figure stuff out and communicate with other people, and especially people that don't understand you.
Yeah.
And I remember from the day I got there till the day I left, I took 2 hours of Mandarin lessons speaking. And by the time I left, I had a friend visit at the very end, and I was like, they were like shocked. They were like, you speak Mandarin? And I'm like, no. That's a tough language. But enough to where I could like order at a restaurant. I could tell a taxi how to like navigate. I could talk to like people at shops and restaurants. And so I knew enough to where I could actually like function.
Yeah.
And I think that's another big piece is like, it's full immersion, right? Nobody's speaking English. Like, you have no option but to like start dialing in whatever's going on around you. And by me taking the language and taking the lessons, it really like honed in, like you're in it full time.
Right.
You're not taking a lesson, then like back to English speaking. It's like you're in it for 3 months totally.
Yeah. And you're motivated too, because it gets old talking to yourself. Right?
Exactly. You got to be able to function somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's that ability to travel young is such a gift. I think I've said this before on the podcast, but like, as a parent, like, want my kids to travel. That's the best investment that I can make, is exposing them to uncomfortable, like, just different places.
It's a huge deal. And everybody in the world is very, very different.
Yeah. It's such a big world.
Yeah.
Such a big world. You take so much for granted about what we have and what we don't have. My sister just got back from Costa Rica in a couple of weeks, and she was talking about how happy the people are. And one of the things I've noticed just traveling is like wealth and happiness are not correlated.
Yeah.
And in America, we associate wealth with happiness, and that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
When you travel, so many lessons to learn from the traveling. So you do some interesting stuff in your 20s, not quite sure where you're going with it. So what next?
Yeah, so come back from Scotland. And I think one of the most valuable things that I got from playing tennis growing up was it was a skill set where I could always survive, if that makes sense. It was a skill set where I got to a level where I was good enough at this sport where if, talking about how wealth doesn't equal happiness, I had the skill now where no matter what, I could go teach a lesson and get money in exchange for it. So, and for whatever reason, I've always thought about that, and that always brought like some level of ease or peace to me in terms of exploring like what I want to do. It just felt like a safeguard.
So you had a fallback. You weren't going to starve.
Yeah. I would always like if I wanted to, I was capable to earn money for a skill that I gained. Mm-hmm. And that,
anywhere in the world.
And that brought a level of peace of knowing that I can try different things.
Yeah.
And that's really what I did. I mean, I came back and did college tennis coaching at a few different places, but I knew that I wanted to do something outside of tennis. I wanted to prove myself at that point from really the age of 12 to call it 24. Tennis was my life. It dominated. Mm-hmm. It was everything. It's all I knew. It was very much my identity. And I knew that I wanted to see if I could do stuff outside of tennis. And I had that fallback, right? Like if I could, it gave me the ability to go try different things, and knowing that like if push came to shove, I could probably go back to college coaching. I could go work at a club. I could find individual lessons off Craigslist, which is what I did sometimes just to earn $1. And so I took a job in New York. This was pretty poor timing, but this was in 2008. And I was looking at a job, like getting into like being a stockbroker on Wall Street. I did an interview, and it was truly like out of the Wolf of Wall Street. Like I met this big cheesy guy who was in charge literally on Wall Street at this, high rise. And he's like, you see these portfolios behind me? And it's like this big stack of like physical books above his head. It's like, that's billions of dollars of accounts. And I'm like, okay, man, I don't even know I don't know what you guys do. Like, I don't even know what a stockbroker is, but I'm here for a job. And ended up not taking that one and interviewed somewhere else and became a technical recruiter for a business. Summer of 2008. So everything's tanking. Everything's about to fall apart. And that job lasted, I don't know, call it 4 months. And it was brutal. Like I lived in it was a 3-bedroom apartment, but so you had 2 nice bedrooms. Like if this is the street, you have like a beautiful bedroom here, big windows. 2 NYU students were there. Where this wine glass was my apartment, and it was smaller than that. It was basically a large walk-in closet.
Right.
Enough to fit a twin bed.
Yeah.
And I paid $900 a month for it.
In 2008.
Insane. So did that, and that was kind of, I would say, East Village-ish. But I had always grown up. I would always wanted to live in New York City. Yeah. Like from the South, that's like, it's like watching Seinfeld. It's like a dream. It's like take the subway to work. And that's what I did. I was in East Village, kind of Alphabet City, and wore a really cheap suit to work every day, put it on, did the tie, and then took the subway in the heat of summer and would show up to work fully drenched in sweat in a suit. And I did that for about 4 months. But it was, it's crazy to think back on because it was a wild job. All they did, I didn't have a computer. I sat at a desk without a computer. Oh wait, there was computers in 2008. All I had was a phone and a stack of note cards with different companies to call and who the person was. And that was so it was like a table like this. There were like 6 of us. One person had a computer. That was kind of the manager. And then we'd just call. We'd look, flip over, next, call. And it was like aggressive cold calling.
Yeah.
And then the manager would give us feedback. And it's just another kind of job where it's like, okay, like this will really get you out of your comfort zone.
Sure.
So I'm having to make 50 calls a day to random people trying to get, basically the pitch was, I've got a SQL developer that has this, and this. He can come into your office today to meet you for this job. And it was just to try to get our candidates in front of these hiring managers to get them hired, so we get a fee off of the salary, basically, or the contract. And it was, it was just that day in and day out with no computer, just having a phone and just going through the note cards. But it, again, developed a good skill of if you're able to cold call and just call random people and try to get an appointment, you can pretty much do anything.
Yeah. And instant feedback of it from the manager.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to hide.
And it was crazy because they'd also like walk me through it. Sometimes they would be speaking and I'd be repeating what they're saying just to dial in like the script.
Right.
Like as I'm on the call, which is kind of difficult. But yeah, and I mean, talk about instant feedback, like knowing how to say something, how to fluctuate your voice, hearing exactly what they're saying. It really ingrained it on how to like sell.
And that makes those little things make a difference.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, I'm thinking the lack of the screen, the lack of a computer. Had you had a computer, you could have found ways to hide.
Oh yeah,
hide from the work.
Oh yeah, right? Absolutely. I mean, I had no computer and a manager right there. I have to call. Like if I'm sitting down here, I'm calling. If I'm not on the phone, they're pissed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think about like how much the computers and the technology has empowered us. But like, then I think sometimes like if you just took all that away and just put the note cards in front of us, like how much more productive we might be.
Absolutely. I think there are in terms of that role, obviously like in terms of productivity and just quantity, I made a lot more calls than I would have.
Yeah.
But what they didn't do a great job of was like actually explaining why things are happening. And I think about this as a kid too. My parents would give me feedback, but I wouldn't understand why. Like I'm somebody that needs to understand like, why am I doing this? Like, what's the macro? Like what's the overall goal? Like for that job, for example, like it's just, you come in and this is your step-by-step of what you do without understanding this leads to this leads to revenue for the company. This leads to profit. This leads to an increased salary for everybody, like commissions. And I think back, like I didn't have that as a kid. I didn't really understand why things like you have to do this, but like why? And then also in career, that happened a lot. So I'm a big why person of I need to understand the macro to understand how my role fits into that.
Yeah. And as an athlete, that's all kind of clear.
Yeah.
Right. Like the why is always pretty simple to figure out.
Yep.
You put in the training during the week, you put in the practice, your why is on Friday night or whatever. Then in work, it changes. It gets more complicated. So if with a guy in like an athlete in their 20s whose career is in the sports part of their life is ending and the business part, the rest of life is starting. It's this odd time where you've got to take what you've learned from the sports part of your life into this new part of your life.
Yep.
And really figure all that out pretty quickly.
Yep. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, like the macro aspect is like thinking about from there forward, it was always kind of reverse engineering, like understanding the end goal and reverse engineering, like what had to happen for me to get there. So like when I was, call it 12, 13, 14, getting into tennis, like I said, I was never interested in going pro. So that wasn't my reverse engineering. It was, okay, I want a college scholarship. What does that mean? Like, what do I need to be ranked? What does, like, where do I have to be at 16, 17 to start getting recruited for that? And it was like, okay, top 100, top 150 in the country. And then you have some good choices for Division I. So that's how I thought about it back then. And I think that's always been a piece of like, I need to understand what that end goal is. Not just for myself, but for like whatever I'm involved in.
Yeah.
If it's a project and I'm working with somebody else, what's the end goal? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And yeah, like you're right. In sports, that's always pretty apparent for the most part.
Yeah.
You know, you're looking at, if you're competing in a sport, like you started tennis late and I don't know if you went into it just like, this is fun, or if you're like, okay, I want to get to 5-0. And some people, Yeah. I mean, that's different, right? Because that's just a hobby. It's fun for you.
Yeah.
It's a way to spend time and be physical and compete and learn a new skill. I guess all of the times that I've thought about it, it's all been kind of livelihood based in a sense. Even as a kid, it was livelihood in respect to going to college. And after that, like even with pickleball now, I mean, fast forwarding a little bit, it's all reverse engineering into livelihood. So I think that's a piece of the macro for me, is needing to understand that to reverse engineer, but based on like career stuff mostly.
Yeah. It gets more complicated too. Like you're going out of college, you're not sure who you are yet, you're not sure where you're going, you're not sure the why. The sports part of your life has been it's fairly simple, for those reasons we talked, but now the rest of the life, it gets more complicated. And I think back to me picking up tennis in my 40s. I think part of the allure of that is the simplicity of it, and going back to like, it's under my control. Like I don't have responsibility for other people. It's not complicated. I just show up on the court and I just try to get good at this one thing. Right. Yeah. And it was so refreshing. Yeah. But in your 20s, you don't have that luxury. Like the world's coming at you fast, and trying to make ends meet, trying to figure out your why, trying to find your place, go to New York. Where does that lead?
Yeah. I think one thing you just said there, simplicity, like I feel like whenever I've seen like really, call it success, call it strides, call it gain, whatever, it's been when there's been a really simple objective, call it. So from New York, I went back into college coaching because I always had that in my back pocket. So coached at Drake, actually with my coach that had left Asheville, who's turned into a good friend. Coached with him at Drake, and then he took the head coaching job at Georgia State, and I went with him there. Outside of that, though, I then went back into kind of looking for jobs, wanting to get out of tennis again, because it was always a fallback. It was never like what I wanted to do. So
do you think that you fell out of love with tennis, or the world just got more, other things became more interesting to you?
I feel like it was more of an internal issue. It wasn't so much of like how the world was changing or anything like that. It was more of the fact that I wanted to prove to myself that I could be successful in something outside of tennis.
Okay.
So it was more of that internal drive of not wanting tennis to define me.
Yeah.
Because at that point, it felt like, okay, well, this is like, if I just stayed in tennis, this is natural progression for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And yes, it would have been, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being a college coach. I enjoyed the team and the coaching and the travel and the recruiting. I actually enjoyed it, but I didn't feel like I would keep enjoying it. I felt like it would have been something that just was easy and something I did because it was easy. So I always had that drive to like, okay, this is always define me. I want to do something outside of it, which is why I really looked at different jobs, different opportunities, tried a bunch of different like businesses that were, not very effective.
Yeah.
But again, didn't want to have, and the thing with the jobs, whether it was the New York job or other jobs, I had a job that was in San Diego and Dallas, all very short term. But again, like those recruiting type office jobs where I'm on the phone and making a lot of calls.
Postcards and a phone.
No cards. Truly. And it went back to that conversation I had when I was a kid and in high school in my driveway. It was like, I don't want that traditional life. Like, why am I'm taking these jobs because, I have to make money somehow in the short term. I don't want to do tennis. I want to go learn something new, that kind of thing. But I didn't want to have the traditional go to a job 9 to 5, go home. And I got a taste of that and I hated it. I didn't last long in any of those jobs because I truly just hated it. I hated the monotony and the routine of waking up and going to the office, showing up, waiting till 5, going home, doing it all the next day. It was just never something. It's just something I've never wanted.
Yeah.
And did it and didn't like it. And I was like, okay, this validates why you should not be doing this. So if that's the case, I've got to figure something out. I mean, college coaching's not that. So there's some draw to that. It's not the routine. It's like you're traveling, you're going to matches, you're doing different stuff. But again, it's tennis, and I don't want to do that. So I was like, okay, I want to figure out some kind of, and I had dabbled in businesses at this point. Like I tried a business called Vacay Pro, which was basically sending different pros out on vacations to different resorts. And so I'd basically partner with a resort, call it in Jamaica. And I would say, hey, I'm going to send you a tennis pro for a week. They're going to teach 2 hours a day. And you just need to give them and a partner a room and board. And then I would charge the instructor $300, $400 to me as a fee for the connection. And then, so they're basically paying $400 for an all-inclusive vacation, and they just teach a couple hours a day and people show up. So did that, but it was very, there was a competitor, and it was very just manual and labor intensive, and like grabbing $400 at a time without much ability to scale at that time. It was taking a lot of time and not producing very much. So I was just like, okay, this isn't going to last. This is not sustainable. And at the time was always in like these business forums online. This was called the Fast Lane Forum. And it was a guy, MJ DeMarco, who wrote a book called The Millionaire Fast Lane. And it basically just talked about principles in business that you need to follow. And it gave I don't remember what the actual framework was, but it was based on providing real value for a need in the marketplace. And it was just very structured and logical and based on that, not fluffy stuff that would come up or chasing money. It was very focused on creating value for others. And so I really liked the forum, but in that forum, I came across this opportunity that was, hey, we're looking for 6 media buyers in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it was this guy that was really well respected on the forum. And I hadn't been on the forum in a while, and I saw it was an older post, and I saw that it had closed, and they already went through this whole process of selecting who was going to come based on the application, based on phone calls, all this stuff. And I was like, man, how did I miss this? This is brutal. That's exactly what I need.
But it's full.
But it's full. So I get a little crazy. I send him a message, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to be in Albuquerque tomorrow. I want to do this. He's like, it's full. And I was like, that's okay. Fly to Albuquerque, find the guy, basically meet with him. And I'm like, look, this is something that I want to do. I want to learn. I'm committed to this. And I'm moving in 2 weeks, and I'll be here for it.
But he didn't, be clear, he didn't invite you.
None of this
out
was,
there.
no, none of this
this
was.
This is Rob saying, this is Rob's plan.
None of this was invitation. Yeah. Right. So it was he's like, no, this is already closed. What do you know? I was like, okay. And I was, at that time, I was working for a healthcare startup based in San Francisco, but I was working from Georgia. I was working remote. And I had gotten to this point where I had tried Vacay Pro, I had tried some other ideas, and it was just this dabbling and stuff. And I was so fed up. I was like, I'm worth so much more, or I feel like I have so much more potential than what I'm giving right now. And it was truly a line in the sand moment of I've got to change something, because I've got a pretty comfortable job. It's remote, so I'm not going to an office every day. It's pretty flexible. It pays okay, but I'm not satisfied. And I was it was, I don't know if it was disappointment in myself, but it was more of fed up of you can do this. You can do something, and it's not this, but you can do something. And I had hit this line, and this opportunity came up, and it was just this point of no return where I was like, this is it. I don't know what it is per se.
You keep calling it an opportunity, but this is not an opportunity. No. This is a closed door.
It's a closed door
that you are going to pry open.
And something that I found online on an online forum.
An opportunity is an open door with someone inviting you in. This is not an opportunity.
No, the door's closed, and I'm knocking, and I'm talking to this guy through the door, but it's certainly not open. The invitation's not there. Yeah. But I fly to Albuquerque. I meet with him.
So how do you meet with? You just knock on his door?
I knew where his office was, so I met him at his office, and I was like, look, I know this is closed. He respected it. He respected the fact that I just flew out there.
Yeah.
Like that's like what he wanted.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to see like somebody committed like that.
Yeah.
And like seeing that fire and willing to do whatever it takes. And that's what I did. And I was like, and he was like, look, we went through like a process to like figure out who's coming. And the process is over. And I'm like, that's all right, but I'm going to be here in 2 weeks. And I was the first person to move there out of that group.
Wow.
that they brought on. So I remember going to that office for, I think 2 or 3 weeks. Like I was the only one in there, and I was just learning what media buying was. I had no idea it was online advertising. I had no idea like what it was or what it meant, or clueless, but learned how to like create a landing page using HTML and CS, like just coding, and
super valuable stuff at that time.
Oh yeah. Like, incredibly.
Yeah.
Learned copywriting, how to craft a good ad, how to create a good landing page that will actually sell product, how to find websites where I could advertise. And that's kind of what I focused on in terms of, we talked about simplicity and having like very easy outcomes. So when the other guys came, we each kind of focused on a platform. So somebody focused on Google, somebody focused on Facebook, somebody focused on something else at the time. And I focused on direct site buys, what it's called. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's, you go to a website and you reach out to the owner and you say, hey, can I buy advertising? And that's what I did. And I had basically an ad server where I would like plug in the ad, and then I would send them the code, the website, and then they would put it up on their website. And that's what I did. I reached out to there was tools where I could like see what websites put up the kind of ads I wanted. And I basically did direct site buys, and in this ad server, I could see, okay, they start serving the ad. In real time, I can see how many impressions I'm getting, how many clicks I'm getting, how much money that's costing me. And I can also see when somebody buys. So I'm just constantly looking at this ad server all day, seeing what the spend is versus what the revenue is. And tweaking ads based on that.
And that math course in meteorology, I'm sure helped, right?
Yeah. Now, luckily, this was pretty simple math. It was, you spend this, you earn this.
The hard part's picking up the phone and making the call.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Knocking on the door.
Having the conversations, trying to negotiate CPM, which is cost per 1,000 impressions, which is what all those contracts were based on. So yeah, I mean, luckily they brought in some pretty good mentors to help us with that and how to negotiate those contracts, which were called IOs, insertion orders. And we would negotiate it based on, you can't serve the same ad to the same person more than 3 times every 24 hours. Like there's certain things, parameters like that.
It's the nuance that you described in the cold calling from New York in the digital world. Like the little things matter.
Oh yeah.
And you learn the little things by prying open the door.
Yeah. And
Albuquerque.
I think people, and this was me for a long time prior to Albuquerque, it was like people want things to be like given to them. Like they want somebody to show them how to do something, or exactly like what the step-by-step is to achieving something. And there's none of that. Everybody's just, and it was the first time I really got my hands dirty. It was the first time where I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my hands really dirty. I'm going to figure out how to do all the stuff that I don't want to do, but I have to learn how to do it. And I knew nobody was going to give it to me, and I had to earn it. And it was one of those moments where it's like, even now there's certain times where I'm like, why can't somebody just show me how to do do it's like, you have to get in the weeds.
You can't skip that part.
Like everybody wants to.
Everybody wants to skip that part. You can't skip that part. Like that's the important part.
But there's so much out there now on like productivity and delegation and like how to, and there's so many courses of how to do this by doing this, this, and this. And it's like, all that's great, but all those people are also just wanting to make money from you. What you need to do is just go do it. Just go do it, whatever it is.
Become good at something. And then be able to knock on the door. Yeah.
And I think going back to the simplicity piece is, so it's really narrowing down a focus. Like it was not just media buying. It was direct site media buying, which is very, very focused. You just reach out to websites and try to run ads and try to make it work. But not just that, it's also getting very narrow and simple on what you're selling. So let's call it a skincare product. So it's just focusing, okay, I'm just going to sell to these direct sites that have a reasonably strong female audience, and I'm just going to put skincare ads up, and I'm going to do that until it works. And if the numbers aren't making sense, that means my ad's not good enough, and I'm going to tweak that. I'm not going to try a different product. I'm not going to try a different website. There's times to adjust, of course, but in terms of like really narrowing down and not giving yourself out and just saying, this is what I'm going to do until it works, there's a lot of power in that.
And it could have been any product.
Anything,
obviously, like you didn't have a competitive advantage in women's skincare products.
No, exactly. There's a million.
Just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And then just grind until it works.
Exactly. And that's hands dirty. There's no
hands
other way
dirty.
to do it.
Yeah, you can't do that and keep your hands clean.
But I think that in terms of simplicity, it's tough nowadays because there's so many, like you said, the world's changing so much, and there's so many opportunities, and it's almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
To where it's tough for people to really laser in like that now.
This has been a theme that keeps coming up in these podcasts with successful people. Is over the course of their lives, the world gets more and more complicated, but what separates them from everybody else is leaning into the old stuff.
Yeah.
Like the index card, right? Cards, like the index cards in the phone and no screen, the relationships, the just knocking on the door that looks like it's closed. Those are old school stuff. Yeah. Right? It's not called simplicity. Like
it's foundational. That's never going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's so hard. Like I really like what you said about where you've grown the most is where you've focused on the simple. You've simplified it and then really focused on it. But that's so hard to do in our world because you have to consciously tune out all of the complexity and all of the noise and really focus on something. It's not easy to do.
I think about it a lot. I think about even now, right? I'm doing a lot of stuff in pickleball now. So just to kind of fast forward a little bit, found that media buying, ended up branching off, doing my own thing, having an advertising company with a partner that was also there, one of the 6 guys. And we did that for 5-6 years and did great, did well. And then from that, found pickleball, basically sold my half to my partner. He continues to run it. He's even today. And then I found pickleball. But even now, so like now that I've done the business side, the advertising, pickleball stuff now, podcast, playing here at the Plex. Even now, in terms of simplicity, it's like I've got so much stuff going on. What would it be like if I just literally stopped doing everything and just opened a landscaping company? And that's all I focused on.
Yeah.
Or I bought a small landscape company and my singular focus was to make that landscaping company as big as it could get.
Yeah.
Or a cleaning or just like a boring business.
Right.
What would happen? Having that singular focus on only something like that. And I think I'm pretty scared of that answer, to be honest with you, because I think it would work really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to do that is complicated. And in a sense, because there's a lot, I love pickleball. I really enjoy it. I've gotten to a certain level in it to where there's a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, would I be, call it quote unquote, more successful, whether it's financially, whether it's whatever, if I did something just like that, where I had just truly like a really singular focus and my only thought every day when I woke up was how to grow this little thing?
Yeah, I think if you've got the personality to be able to pry open that door that you described earlier, if you have that, you could be successful with a lot of different products, right? And focused energy. But the product does matter.
Yeah.
Like some products are going to give you more joy,
of course,
than others.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways to make money in the world. It's like finding the thing that's consistent with who you are and that'll be fulfilling to you. And you found that you found that in pickleball. And so you sold the media company. And tell us about this discovering pickleball.
Yeah. So this was end of 2019. I had basically spent a year outside the business after leaving it, trying a bunch of different things. Did a podcast called Fail On for a year, which is just traveling to different places, interviewing very successful people on the struggles they went through to find success. No business plan with that. It was just purely an expense and but it was fun. I met a lot of cool people and had a lot of good conversations, which to me was a good win. Right. But not sustainable in terms of making a living off of it. So end of 2019, I'm kind of doing a little ad consulting here and there, but kind of trying to figure out like what's next. And had a friend, Adam Franklin from Franklin Sports, who we had just gone on a golf trip together, and he was telling me about pickleball and how it's their fastest growing category and how they were pretty early on with it. And he was like, most of the pros we sponsor were top tennis players in college, and he's like, even like some of the guys we're sponsoring make just as much as our Major League Baseball players with the batting gloves that they offer them for sponsorship. And I was like, oh, that is growing then. It's pretty interesting. So he sent me a paddle, and I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and went out and did a lesson and was basically hooked right away. I was like, this is the perfect combo of tennis, but also table tennis, and also like lean more to being good at doubles tennis, which I really liked. So for me, it was like, I wasn't call it a fantastic tennis player by any means. I was relatively to a lot of people to pros, I guess you could
tennis
say.
Is so relative.
It's all relative. I know, but I wasn't playing Wimbledon.
Yeah.
So I was a good college Division I player, but it was the perfect blend of like table tennis, volleying. And I was like, one of my better attributes is volleys and kind of like good fast hand eye from table tennis. And I was like, I think I could be pretty good at this. So did the first lesson, went home that day, spun up a new Instagram called Pickleball Rob. I have since changed it to just my name, but it was Pickleball Rob at the time. And I created an Instagram video that just said, hey, I'm gonna go pro in a year. I'm gonna document it right here while I do it. So that was my very first post on my current Instagram. And then, that was into 2019. And basically I determined what does going pro mean is I'm earning money at pro tournaments.
Okay.
And pro events. So obviously COVID hit at the beginning of 2020.
Yeah.
But there were still tournaments that were happening over that summer and into the fall. And I was participating in some of them, and I did it. I earned money at pro events by the end of 2020. And from there have just kept playing. I'm
really curious about that year. Like the way you start that is pretty cool. Like you find this new thing and say, this is it. But not only that, you put it out there to the world that you got this audacious goal. Yeah. It's like burning the boats. Yeah. Like you created accountability for yourself. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But it was, I like kind of the big public goals. I like big projects, call it grand projects, where it's like it goes a little bit back to the macro. Like I was talking about earlier in terms of being able to reverse engineer like what I'm trying to do. And I think by me creating that kind of structure of like I'm going to go pro in a year, for my brain, it just gives me like a really clear framework of like what I'm doing. Simplifies it.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
It does.
So it all kind of ties together, but it simplifies. Okay. Like this, I announced this, I'm not doing anything else. This is what I have to do. It's going to be hard, but it's not complicated.
So you're in Austin and you don't become a professional at anything with a ball in your backyard by yourself. Yeah. Tell me about like, who did you surround yourself with? Like what's day 2 like?
Yeah. So I took a lesson in Austin on day 1. Just a guy named Calvin just showed me the ropes. What are the rules? What is the kitchen? What are these basic things? How do you what's this basic strategy? And to be honest, like it was a lot of talking. I was like, I just want to hit the ball. Can I just hit the ball? Like I want to see like what this feels like. I just want to. So I was like, but he knew I played college tennis. He's like, oh, you could probably be pretty good at this sport. So he put me in touch with a group down about 45 minutes south of Austin in San Marcos, where there were a bunch of 5-0 players. And they were so kind to let me play right out of the gate. And it was, looking back, I would say it was probably the most crucial aspect of me achieving what my goal was to go pro, was not having to toil at like a local gym hardwood floor with like some 3-0s. I did that one day, and it was, I'm glad I experienced it, but it's like weird clicky, like you're not good enough to play on the top court. You just started. So it was like weird energy. And, we talk about that at the Plex sometimes of how we want to make it welcome and open. But this group in San Marcos, Texas, which is south, was just so kind. They were all 5-0 plus, older. I would say they were 50 plus, mostly. There were some younger guys, but they brought me in right away, and I just got my ass kicked for a couple months. Yeah. And again, similar to like how I started in tennis, you just go through losing and then you get better. And
you were okay with that. It's hard to get in with those groups.
Yeah.
Did you pry open the door like you did in Albuquerque?
Nah, they were more welcoming. And they have always been like this, even after I left. Like they are kind of known as, so it's a couple named Christina and Walter Dorman. And it's kind of known as the Dorman training camp. Is kind of, but like they like Walter's he's an instructor or teacher at Texas State in San Marcos. And they just get joy out of playing pickleball every day and like bringing in new players and helping them get better.
Wow.
So I think
like an incubator of sorts,
a little bit. Right? And I was kind of like one of the first that they brought through, but it was truly like a training camp where I came in, got my ass kicked for a few months. Then eventually, I think this first day I was there, Walter was like, he'll be better than me in 6 weeks. And sure enough, almost right to the week, it was like, okay, now I'm winning.
Yeah.
And it was, I would say I was in that group kind of probably 4 to 6 months, but then I was like, okay, I'm going to be pretty limited in terms of the next level if I stay here.
Yeah.
So I decided to seek out, and this is, I decided to seek out somebody that had already done what I wanted to do, which is go pro and try to like get advice and get help and try to get into that group where I could get better, even from where I was at. Because at that point I was probably like call it a 5-0, or just maybe a bit better than a 5-0, 5-5, I don't know. But I wasn't going to be like a relevant pro at that time. So I was like, okay, well, to get to the next level, I've got to do what I just did, but with kind of the next level player. So reached out to some pros online. They were like, yeah, I'm here in Florida. One of them was Vivian David, and she's like, yeah, my dad has an indoor court here. We just practice that. If you like moved here, we could just practice all the time. Like, of course. And I was like, and another guy was Deckel, who's one of the best players in the world. And it's like, these people are so like, they're just pretty welcoming. I don't know if it's just because it's like kind of COVID time and they're like bored.
But you sought them out. It's not like you didn't bump into them in a 7-Eleven.
I was very intentional with like, okay, I know I need to like get better play.
But this is a consistent pattern I'm seeing in the story. Like you didn't rely on chance to put yourself in these environments. And it's like the New York office with the cards and the phone, the Albuquerque place where you learn so much about marketing, and then San Marcos. Like these are the right environments around the right people, but it didn't happen by chance. You sought them out.
I mean, it wasn't even like always it was pretty subconscious. It was like an inherent part of me knew that like, so I knew my macro goal, right? Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something with like declaring what you want, like what your end goal is, not even knowing how you're going to get there. And then just like, going on the journey and day by day, just trying to get better, but still having that macro end goal in mind. Like stuff happens, like subconsciously, like everything kind of starts pointing in that direction, but it is intentional. It's not just like things just happen, but there is something of like, once you declare that subconsciously, like everything kind of like within you is like going that direction and trying to lead you to what your end goal, like what you want. I just feel like there's a lot of power in knowing what you want at the end.
Yeah.
And for me, it was seeking out. I knew to get to the next level, I'd have to go play with pros, and I would have to do what I just did in San Marcos and get my teeth kicked in and figure out how they'll let me in those games with them. And again, kind of like the San Marcos, I mean, kind of like the Albuquerque thing is when you show somebody that like you're willing to do stuff that other people aren't, like nobody just flies to Albuquerque and just like goes into something without an invitation. Same thing. There was an invitation because I asked, but I was willing to move to Florida to seek out better play from Austin. Like that's how committed I was to that end goal. So pick up, move to basically Fort Myers, Naples area. And now I'm playing with, call it some of the, top 10 players in the world based on, them welcoming me in because they saw how like dedicated I was, the fact that I was willing to move there.
Right.
So there's just, it was, and that was probably the biggest determinant from there is just, I was able to get good play and like with top pros.
So you went from that and you've become one of the best pickleball players in the world. Like you put yourself in the right environments. That's a big part of it. You've got some natural talent, but there's a lot of there's gazillions of talented tennis players out there, right?
Yeah.
Put yourself in the right environments. What do you think separates those who make it to the top of the game versus all of those who are in the right place and don't make it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, just looking at like the landscape of like the pickleball players that are coming in and the ones that, very talented, raw ability. To me, it truly is getting in the right environment and being around the people that you can get better from. It's environment's so huge.
Yeah,
it's so huge, especially in pickleball where practicing, call it with some of the top 10 players, top 20 players, you're going to see shots. You're going to get used to shots that, like, let's say I was training in isolation in France with another guy that was my level. Like, you're just not going to see some of the stuff. So being in that environment of a bunch of different players that are very, very good is a big deal. And not just that, like, pickleball is unique in terms of you can't do it on your own unless you're playing singles, which isn't the primary event in pickleball. It's doubles. So getting good partners is very difficult out of the gate.
Yeah.
So trying to prove yourself that you're good and trying to get somebody good to play with you. Like even now with the level I'm at, if I play with somebody that's a level below me, like I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
Because pickleball is unique in terms of you can really isolate players.
Right.
So
it's
having a partner that's at your level or better is incredibly beneficial. And by being in the right environment, you show people that you're good. It's easier to get partners. It's an important piece.
Yeah. The technical part of pickleball is important. Tennis players pick that up quicker than us. But the more I play the game, the more I realize this is a decision-making sport. And I assume that at the top, the difference is not technical ability. It's how quickly you can make a decision because there's so many options. And the better you get, the more options there are, which is what I love about the game.
Yeah. I think we talked about this a while ago. So in Jacksonville, Danny Werfel, Heisman Trophy winner, played at University of Florida, huge pickleball advocate now, lives in Atlanta, but goes down to Jacksonville a lot. And I was playing with him, and one of the best college quarterbacks of all time.
Yeah.
Didn't have huge size. He's maybe 6 foot on a good day. So didn't have all the physical tools of like a 6'4" guy with a cannon, but he was incredibly intelligent, incredibly smart. And he compares pickleball to being a quarterback and how having to have such a small window of time to process and make decisions based on everything that's happening. Because it's not just, I should hit this shot because this is where I'm at in the court. It's, I should hit this shot because I'm here, the ball's here, my partner's here, my one opponent's there, my other opponent's there. There's so many things you're trying to process in that moment, and also knowing what the score is and how crucial that one point is. Conservative, aggressive,
when to take the risks,
when to do it. And he really compared pickleball to being like, it's why he loves pickleball. He said, is because it forces you to really process decisions in a very, very tiny window of time.
Yeah. Do you see that separating people the further you go in the sport, like that is the differentiator?
It's a really big deal. Let's say my partner and I are playing a team at a tournament in the first round. It's a team that, let's say they got through qualies, talented team. Everybody in the main draw is talented because you have to go through qualies, you have to go through pre-qualies sometimes. There's so many good teams. What I'm trying to do in that first round against that team is, one, they know my level and that I'm consistent. I'm not going to miss much. So that's all I'm trying to do, is just be really solid, play clean, and not do anything crazy. And I know that if I do that long enough, they're going to be like, oh man, like this guy's never going to miss, or this team's never going to miss. I'm going to have to create something. And then you just let them start trying to create. And that's where they fall apart. So, and I'm telling you, that's like clockwork. That will happen every single tournament in the first round. That is what will happen.
But that sounds different than going into a tennis tournament.
It's very different. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say tennis and pickle. It's such a different dynamic and truly like different strategic sport.
Yeah.
It's a lot mental, because myself and my partner, we might have a better skill set in terms of decision making and consistency, but that opponent that we're going to beat 11-5, 11-5 could have just better. They could have faster hands. They could have more speed. They could have more reach. They could have a better physical standing than we have.
Yeah.
But we're going to win based on decision making and consistency.
Yeah. Yeah. I would never describe playing tennis as being a quarterback.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But pickleball, and it's such an interesting sport because you pick up different tools, but then the downside of having more tools is there's more decisions to make.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I see people coming into the game and they just hit with power, especially tennis players. Like they just come in, they just hit everything there's no decision making.
Yep.
It's just power, power, power.
Yep.
And then you pick up the soft game. Well, now you've got to make a decision. Well, now you're not as good at either power or the soft game because you have to make it. And then you pick up a lob, you pick up all these different tools. So it's so interesting. It's so interesting that way. And I'm sure you've seen tons of players go through this process.
Oh yeah. And oftentimes it's a pretty big crutch, even at the highest level. Like I can think about a handful of players that I would say are probably the most talented in the sport physically, with all of their shot making ability, with their disguise, but it's too many options. It's not, I wouldn't say it's too many options. You want all those options, but you want to figure out how to use them and at the right times and the frequency to use them. Frequency is a really big deal in pickleball, because the more you do something, the more they know it's coming.
Yeah.
The less you do something, the more effective it is, because they're not expecting it.
Yeah.
So that's a huge, like I talk about and think about frequency a ton.
Yeah.
Especially as you get into these long points, what's the right time to do this? Because if you're doing it every third ball, they're always going to be kind of on guard. You want them to put their guard down and not know where it's coming or that it is coming. So it's just, at the higher levels, it's so fun because, again, there's so many different options that you can do and that can come at you. So it's never ending. It's like people are still like developing new things, and it's still like it's very early in the life cycle of the sport. Yeah, where the game's still trying to be figured out.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because it's not so much physical, it's so much mental. And you told me one time, like you're in your late 30s, but you haven't peaked yet. In any other sport, you would have peaked. Yep. By your 30s, right?
Yep.
But pickleball is so mental and all of this, like.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, to me, that's truly like what the draw of it is. Like, let's call it versus tennis. I'm never going to be as good at tennis now than I was at 22. when I was a senior in college. But pickleball, I feel like I could be better than I am now in 5 years.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly unique. Being mid 40s and being better than I am in my 30s you would never think it's possible.
Yeah.
But absolutely possible.
Yeah.
As long as, I mean, you don't need to be explosive in doubles. You just need to be able to get around.
Right.
And the one kind of like where pros fall off based on age is hand speed more than anything else. Like, so I've seen it over like the 5 years I've been at pickleball is you've had some guys that had some of the fastest hands in pickleball, but as they get older that they lose and it doesn't take much. It's such small margins of that you lose it where it's just like, it's enough to be a big deal.
Right. Right.
So that's the one thing that goes. So as long as you have that and you have your feet, like there's a guy, Matt Wright, who's a lawyer that's 46, 47, plays pickleball on the weekends at these tournaments, and he's one of the best in the world. Yeah. And he's got some of the fastest hands in the world.
Yeah. It's a magical sport, man. Like it's
super unique.
Just the more I play it, the more I appreciate the uniqueness.
Yeah.
The uniqueness of it and the way that it brings the world together. And if we had more time, man, I'd love to dig into like all your travels and seeing the growth of the game in different places of the world, but we'll have to save that for next time.
We can do a part 2 at some point.
Sounds good, man. Thanks so much for being on. It's a great story to see the patterns of your life and the things that along the way, the consistent things that you did that eventually converted to professional sport. It's pretty cool.
No, it was cool. Like you did a great job in terms of like letting me, cause I'm just reflecting on it. It's like, man, it's a lot of stuff I didn't really even have through lines for that now I have through lines for, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on.
Yeah,
it's great.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Okay.